Mother 3 has a really great story, or at least I think so. I understand why, despite the hell this game had to go through to be made, the story really did not change all that much during development, because there was absolutely something special there. But no story in any piece of media is flawless, and for as much as I love Mother 3, there are a few wrinkles that really have me, as well as plenty of other fans of the game, scratching our heads in confusion. That is all to say, there's a particular plot hole that Mother 3 has which is sort of glaring, but at the same time not entirely unexplainable. With that in mind, I think it'd be fun to try to explain what exactly this is and even attempt to solve this plot hole, so let's delve right into that. Obvious spoiler warning for Mother 3. To begin, I gotta give some backstory on the game's setting. The Nowhere Islands is where the game takes place, home to a small community known as Tazmily Village. All the people here know each other and help one another. That is, of course, until the events of the game all occur. But from the beginning of the game, you're able to familiarize yourself with the tight-knit community and get a feel for who all these characters really are. There's just one thing though. In Chapter 1, the wife of Flint and the mother to Lucas and Klaus, Hinawa, dies. And this is treated as absolutely appalling and shocking, as it should. But part of the reason it shocks everyone is that Tazmily had never witnessed a tragic death like Hinawa's before. But if that's the case, then how are there multiple other children in the village who were missing parents before Hinawa's passing? Yeah, we're not doing that. This question is what most would consider to be the biggest plot hole of Mother 3, and that is to say, while it is definitely a noticeable wrinkle regarding Mother 3's plot, it is far from something that takes away from the overall game. I think it goes to show that this being Mother 3's biggest plot hole, something which is relatively minor compared to everything else, it speaks volumes as to the quality of Mother 3's narrative overall. That said, it's still worth discussing because, well, I still always find things to talk about with Mother 3, and I enjoy doing so let's do it. Specifically, the children in the village who are missing parents are Fuel, who has no mother, Nana, who has neither of her parents, and Angie, who has no father. Before I bring up anything else, I want to sort of debunk the belief that it's possible that these villagers who would have been these kids' parents could have just died of natural causes and or old age, because regardless of a naturally brought about death, children growing up with one or more missing parents in their life is inherently a tragic thing, and for what's described as a happy utopian society, surely this would be something that would bring uneasiness towards this community, even if any of these parents were to have gotten sick and died. That's still tragic even if it's not the same circumstances as Hinawa's death. Therefore, her death wouldn't make sense as the first tragic death to occur in the village, if other villagers similar in age to her were to have died before. Also, in case anyone is wondering, all these kids are younger than Kumatora, who it is revealed that she was an infant at the time of Tazmily Village's conception. Therefore, Fuel, Nana, and Angie all would have had to have been conceived after the events of the White Ship, and all these missing parents in question would have had to have passed after Tazmily's establishment, not before. These kids aren't the same as with Duster, for instance, who would have lost his mother pre-White Ship. With that out of the way, it's time to explain some out-of-universe stuff, but this will lead back to in-universe stuff. Long before the release of Mother 3, these promotional articles about the game were being published in the magazine Dengeki Nintendo 64. Many of these articles covered in-game lore that was set to have been relevant within Mother 3's world. 2 articles are actually relevant here, one about Fuel and one about Nana. Regarding Fuel, his article is a report on how he and his father, Lyda, washed ashore after getting into a boating incident, with Lyda's wife and Fuel's mother, a 28-year-old woman named Tobacco, missing with no trace of her body. As for the Nana article, it was reported that the father of Nana, a 40-year-old man simply referred to as Papa, had gone missing after a sudden voyage at sea. These 2 articles, particularly the first one, were seemingly actually hinting towards a subplot that was to involve a 2-headed Kraken Chimera that was to be an enemy in the game, and unbeknownst to the characters in the game, this Kraken actually ate Tobacco and Papa. The thing is though, this Kraken didn't end up in the final game, So as much as it pains me to say this isn't something I can say fills a plot hole within Mother 3. Besides, there are still some unanswered questions, such as where's Nana's mother if we can see her father? Either way, we can't just simply explain what I established earlier with just this, but it can help in explaining my headcanon regarding this all. So, the Tazmily villagers just straight up do not know they are the only village and inhabitants on the Nowhere Islands. This is supported by a few things. With Letter's explanation of the beginning of Tazmily Village, he emphasizes how it was all done very rushed and hastily, suggesting there wasn't much time to really establish some sort of importance regarding these people being some of the last people alive in the whole world. But also, if they were to have had that knowledge, it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense either. Letter also states that when the people of the White Ship arrived, they discussed with great seriousness what they must do to prevent another end of the world, and their solution was to wipe their memories and live simple, blissfully ignorant lives. Which is to say, the villagers of Tazmily wouldn't know a whole lot about the world around them. They certainly wouldn't know the geography of the Nowhere Islands, therefore wouldn't know that they're again literally the only village in existence. It'd be reasonable for them to assume that if a villager travelled far enough and didn't return, they could hypothetically find another village or town to live in. Also, this was something that was meant to be a tangible inclusion in the game originally, as there was a separate town in the N64 version of the game and possibly early on in the GBA version's life too, a beach town known as Great Scale Village. So, even in the context of the final game, it wouldn't be a stretch for the Tazmily villagers to have assumed, well, if there's our village here, there has to be even more towns than that around. Now, I know what you're thinking, what does this have to do with the missing parent I was discussing earlier? Well, to put it simply, if a deceased person's body is never found, these villagers just simply would not assume the worst and would assume that anyone missing is still safe out there somewhere with other people in another village. If anything, I feel like this would explain several things within Mother 3. Firstly, it explains why the villagers don't really question all that much when Facade comes to Tazmily. They probably just assumed he's from some village far away on another part of the island, and through his travels, stumbled upon their village. Secondly, it contextualizes just how tragic Hinawa's death is to the village. When Hinawa dies, she is gone forever. There's no veneer you can view it under as she might be okay somewhere else. No, her heart had a Drago Fang pierced through it, and she was found lifeless. Those other examples of missing villagers, while you could say it was delusional or foolish of the Tazmily villagers to possibly view this in such a way, if there's no corpse or remains around to confirm they're dead, who's to say that's what must have happened? Maybe they are okay somewhere. And that's what separates Hinawa's death from those cases. They're not tragic if you don't want them to be. And that is tragic in of itself from the player's perspective, but from the perspective of these villagers, as long as they don't have to assume the worst, that these other missing villagers will just return someday, yeah, I think you get the picture. In addition, this all ties back into two pretty big plot events in Mother 3. During the game, both Klaus and Duster go missing. Duster is eventually found, albeit with amnesia that he's actually able to recover from, and Klaus, technically you could say the same exact thing for him actually. Thing is, they fit perfectly into this interpretation I've presented. Both go missing and no one manages to find any of their remains. The villagers assume they will return, as they would have already had to have assumed with the other missing folk. One additional thematic detail of interest that I feel makes this headcanon stronger is observing how much the general attitudes and mindsets of the Tazmily villagers shift over time. Towards the beginning of the game, these folks are joyful and full of hope and kindness. They don't assume the worst, being naive and not particularly speculating on the cause of the huge forest fire, and struggle to handle a tragedy like Hinawa's death. And yet after the time skip, they've grown so apathetic and disinterested with many of the people around them and their individual plights. When Duster finally returns after 3 years of being missing, there's so little fanfare surrounding him. If Tazmily Village hadn't changed so much due to Porky's influence, perhaps they would have cared more. Furthermore, so many villagers falsely assume Klaus is gone for good and want Flint to give up in his searches. You can feel the change in terms of the newfound apathy found in these characters compared to their previous selves. And that, I think, is a super interesting way to look at these characters. There's plenty more I could get into, like how these villagers' mindsets were probably warped by Facade gossiping and feeding them misinfo about people he didn't like, or even just that a lot of the villagers sort of just weren't the brightest to begin with. But I've sorta answered my question I proposed before, so I won't meander on this. I will say though, this headcanon interpretation thingy I've presented is of course not without its own flaws. It'd be reasonable to ask, for instance, if certain villagers were to have gone missing back before the events of the game beginning, why didn't other villagers go out to look for them? That prompt can sort of be answered just by considering the insidious nature that Tazmily displays, even long before the Pigmask's influence comes into place. While this is a bit of a topic that's best saved for another video, I will say that despite being described as a utopian society, the reality is with Tazmily Village is that there was some degree of issues that were underlying the society. The best example I can think of is Mike in chapter 4 being told that his sexist comment was called sexual harassment these days. If it's only now called sexual harassment, was similar behaviour in the past days of the village just seen as acceptable? I also feel like this is somewhat relevant to my point before about Duster and Klaus. Being an adult, no one actively searches for Duster while he's missing. In the same way, no one seemed to be searching for the other adult villagers who would have been these missing parents as discussed. Klaus gets to be the only exception of actually having a search for him going, but even then, the only active participant is his father, and most of Flint's former friends and acquaintances flat out shun him for not giving up on hope for finding his missing son. No matter which way you look at it, there's more to the surface regarding these villagers of Tazmily, and while their apathy comes into full force post-time skip, you can even see it as having existed long before then, and not bothering to try and find missing villagers out missing in other parts of the island, and just assuming they were otherwise safe and would return on their own accord, fits so well into this interpretation of this world, I feel. So yeah, to summarize, the people of Tazmily only really treated Hinawa's passing as the first tragic death in the village because they didn't want to believe that other people who had previously lived there and had gone missing with no trace had to have been dead. Either way, there are still even more unanswered questions here. Like, where the hell exactly does Nana sleep? She just flat out is the only Tazmily villager, pre-time skip, without a house. And with that, I'd like to invite you all to leave a comment on your headcanons and interpretations you have to fill the plot holes found within Mother 3. What I've presented in this video is, of course, not a perfect solution, so get thinking if you wish to drop a comment. I'm also curious if you'd all rank the missing parents thing in Mother 3 as the biggest plot hole in the game. I'd say otherwise the only plot hole that's nearly as notable is, how does Flint know about the needles and the Dark Dragon if he was off screen when all the explanation of these things occurred? Again, not a game ruining plot hole at all, but something to still think about. Although, one thing I want to bring up before the end of this video that I feel some people will find of note is how the graveyard in the second chapter has zombies that emerge that somehow remember Duster. Yeah, look, Mother 3 has some fantasy elements, and zombies inexplicably being able to reanimate themselves and talk isn't realistic. And while you could make the argument that they would have had to have died after the establishment of Tazmily Village, but before the events of the game, I don't know. This is just some messy territory that I don't feel is meant to be hinting at anything overarching. And besides, I don't think this really dispels the point I made earlier about children growing up with missing parental figures being tragic in of itself, any way you slice it. So even if you were to assume these could be seen as the potential rotting corpses of the missing parents, I don't think it's that deep. I think they just wanted to have zombies you could fight in the graveyard part of the game. But hey, if you disagree, like I said, feel free to write down in the comment section. Either way, I want to thank you for watching this video. I have more story-related Mother 3 things I want to discuss soon, so maybe press that subscribe button if you want to see that as soon as it's up. I'd also like to announce real quick that due to some recent events, I've decided to make my own Tumblr and Blue Sky accounts. If you want to see updates and cool shit that I post, then feel free to follow me on those places, because don't count me on being too active on Twitter these days. But anyways, I hope you all stay well and safe.